Daniel 6, I call this the prophet's progress. In Daniel chapter 1 through chapter 6, you get character stories about this man named Daniel. The remainder of the book is a deep doctrinal treatise on prophecies. However, you can't have the latter. You can't have the deep prophecies that are legitimate if you've not built the character that's in the first half of the book. That's where the man comes to play. If the man has not been put through the fire and molded by God, God won't use him to bring out the deep doctrinal truths. Daniel 6. I'm going to jump through this quickly. Y'all know the story. But in verse 1, and by the way of me doing this, it'll also give you the outline. In verse 1, it says, it pleased Darius. That'll be our first word, is pleased, to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And this is where Daniel comes into the story. Verse 3. Then this Daniel was preferred. There's our second point. And here's the theme of it. The reason he was preferred is because an excellent spirit was in him. Okay, drop down to verse 7. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask, here's our next point, a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save thee, O king, he should be cast into the den of lions. Okay, he's got some enemies right off the bat. We're going to drop down to verse 9. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Who's the king now? They've told him what he's going to do, and he bought into their story, and he did it. Verse 16. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. I don't have a P word in the verse for this one, but I'll give you one. It's protection. And that actually came from the king, not from Daniel. Verse 28. So this Daniel, our last point, prospered in the reign of Darius, and it didn't end there, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. All right, the first thing we notice in verse 1 is he said it pleased Darius. This is a king. A king does what he wants to do, basically. And he said, you know, it would make me happy if I had that man right there running the show, because I think he knows what he's doing. He's got things on the ball. Look at Daniel 6, verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased. When Daniel's not in the picture, there's a vacuum, a void left. That should be known about Christians. When they're in a position of ruling and of giving instruction, it should bring peace to those around them. And when they're not there, it should be noticeable. Matthew 14, verse 6.
It's interesting, it said he was displeased with himself. He knows he did what he did.
Yes, it was he thought it was self-pleasure to put Daniel in position. And now when he was conned into taking him down out of his position, he was displeased with self. It was all about self. He didn't ask God's opinion on anything. It pleased him to put Daniel in there, so he did it. He didn't ask God's permission. He's a pagan king. Matthew 14, verse 6. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Got to watch out for our pleasure. Many times the devil will use pleasure to sidetrack you. And that's what he's done in our story here. He used the pleasure of Darius both to put a man in position and then watch him fall with some wicked men. 1 Timothy 5, Bible says, she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. Pleasure might seem like the end of the game, but it's not. While a man is pursuing pleasure, he's miserable, because no pleasure satisfies that's man-made or devil provided. Look at Luke chapter 12. Here's a rich man. You think the rich man's made it and he's happy. Very few rich men are happy. Riches don't make a man smile. They usually make him a miser and, a penny pincher. And everybody's out to get him, he thinks, and he's miserable. Luke 12, verse 19. This rich man says this, "And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease. Eat, drink, and be merry," like Belshazzar did. Verse 20. But God said unto him, "Thou fool, this night shall thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose things be, I can't read. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided?" Said, you did a great job of stocking up your storehouse, but when you're dead, what good does it do you? Verse 21. So he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now, it's not wrong to have wealth and riches. The Bible's not against that. However, if you have that as a substitute for having riches in God and spiritual things, it's a poor substitute. And it is a con of the devil that he uses. Revelation 3. Revelation 3, verse 1. Message to the churches in the tribulation, or one of the churches in the tribulation. "And unto the angel of the church of Sardis write, These things saith he that hath the 7 spirits of God, and the 7 stars. I know thy works, that thou hast a name, that thou livest, and art dead." Pleasure just for the sake of pleasure doesn't do you any good. Even when you think you've got it, and this woman thought she had it, this church was living it up and enjoying it. God says, no, it's going to be a very short-lived enjoyment, because I say you're already dead. Whew. So we need to get pleasure from where God says we can have pleasure, because that'll be eternal. The next thing in our passage there was in verse 3, Daniel 6, verse 3. It says, Daniel was preferred. That's a preference. Many people have low standards, and they prefer nothing. They prefer whatever you talk them into. Now, Daniel was preferred for a reason. He said that he had an excellent spirit. If a Christian will exhibit his Christianness to the world, Christianness, I don't think that's a word, but we just made it up. His Christianity to the world, it will be recognized as an excellent spirit, because our God is excellent. Proverbs chapter 12. There was a reason for Daniel's success, and it wasn't all pomp and ceremony. Proverbs 12, verse 24. He says, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. Daniel has been diligent. He's been doing what he's supposed to do. Now, he had plenty of competition. We know in our chapter right here that of the 120 rulers there, he was number 3 in the line for the kingdom. However, nobody liked him but he and the king. So there's plenty of competition. He must have been a very diligent man in order to stand out amongst all those other people. Proverbs 22, verse 29. He says, seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men, meaning average, just the common man. He's going to stand before the kings. So, when you do what you're supposed to do and you're diligent, it puts you in the spotlight. Sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not good. Daniel has seen the spotlight a couple of times when it was painful. But that's part of it. Look at Matthew 25. This is God's opinion of it when Jesus gives this parable. His Lord said unto him, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. That's not much, a few. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. Now that shows you the mercy of God. God only gives us a few things that we're supposed to be diligent in. You don't have to worry about overcomplicating it. That's what most man-made religions are all about. Let's overcomplicate it. That's what the scribes and the Pharisees did. They wrote a whole nother book of rules because God didn't have enough. Well, they didn't get credit if you obeyed God's rules, so they had to write their own. And man has a tendency to slip into that rule-keeping business instead of honoring God. That one will get you out all right. Honor God. And then you'll be obeying the right rules. Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4, verse 28. He says, let him that stole steal no more. Doesn't end there. That's the way man would end it. Man would say, if you stole, don't do that again. Now come on back in and look at all my goodies. We'll put you in charge of the goodie house. That's the way the world does things, or expects you to do them. That's not what the verse does. The verse says this, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. So God says this, be diligent. If ever there was a time you can look and see I was not diligent, God says, okay, now double your effort and give it away. God says, don't benefit from it. If you have not held, and none of us have 100% of the time, if you can identify some areas that you're lacking in, he says, find an area that you can do some good and get busy doing it for someone else and don't benefit from it. Whew, that's a tough one. That's a New Testament command that's probably more harsh than most of them you find in the Old Testament. People think the Old Testament is full of commands. I got news for you. There's more commands in the New Testament than in the Old, if a man will pay attention. 1 Thessalonians 4. Yeah. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 11. Yeah, if you do it to be seen, you didn't do it for the right reason. But you can go the other extreme too. You can be seen by trying to hide it. That can cause just as big a scene as just doing what's the right thing to do. You don't have to make a big production of not being seen, because that's telling everybody, look what I'm doing. 1 Thessalonians 4:11, he says this, and that you study to be quiet. That's missing in modern Christianity, is study. Periodically, you'll find people who will read their Bible. Rarely will you find anybody who will study it. I mean, without a study book, you and God sit down and read it. Study it. Research the Word. Is there something in that verse that stands out? Find out how it works, and God will give you the info on it if you're willing to study. Study is gone, but we're commanded to study. He says, study. If you'll study, this will happen. You'll learn how to shut your mouth. One thing study does for you is it gives your mind some place to go. You'll be sitting there trying to figure out a problem, putting scripture in the right place and figure out how this thing all works together. That'll be a good place for your mind to be, rather than the advertisement the world's trying to push on you. Study. It'll help you close your mouth. He says it'll do one other thing, and to do your own business. You wouldn't think that. But he says if you want to do your business properly, one of the best things you can do is go study. Now, it's not study the world's garbage. That did you no good to begin with. You need to study the scripture. He says, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. Paul says, there's that word command. I told you about the New Testament giving you more commands. Paul said, when I showed up, I gave you a command, not a suggestion. He said, I gave a command. The command was this: you better get to work. Now, this is the thing that's been shirked by modern America, is work with your hands. The very thing Paul said everybody ought to be involved in. Do something with your hands. You know, America runs on our truckers, and it's one of the jobs is disappearing. Great job. Gone bye-bye. I'll tell you another good job. You would not like living in America very long if we didn't have it, is plumbers. They're going bye-bye. That's a great job. Well, working with your hands. Somebody that works with their hands does something that benefits everybody. Paul says that's a good place to start. Do something with your hands. You know what? Usually when you're a worker that's a skilled labor, doing something physical, the rest of the pencil pushers do not stand by and clap for you. Now, they're going to end up paying you to do whatever it is needs to be done. However, they don't give you the praise for it. Paul says, no, you'll learn some things from it. Find something you can do with your hands. I'm not saying all pencil pushers are bad. If you got to push a pencil, that's great, but also find something you can do with your hands. Over and over, this use of the word hands, plural in the Bible, is brought out. So a person, if they sit at a desk all day, they need to find a hobby that works with their hands. You know, that's one of the things that Paul uses another place to explain the body of Christ, is hands and feet. Those are two things that God's put on every man's body so he can learn about the body of Christ. 2 Timothy 4, verse 6. Work with your hands, but then the word hand means something else too. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is where? At hand. That is, it's almost like this. God's counting time with his hand. And he says, it's almost time. I've just counted up enough, and now I'm bringing him on in. God's got a hand, and with it, he's doing something. He's counting down time. For Paul, he said, I know my time, my number is almost up. You know, that's how we say we are, numbers up. Well, maybe God's counting down some certain numbers until he gets to yours, and then you get called home. There's an old song that says this, work for the night is coming, work through the sun and moon, fill the bright hours with labor, rest comes sure and soon, give every flying minute something to keep in store, work for the night is coming when men work no more. That's a fact. There's only so much time we're given on this earth to work. Be diligent. Daniel was diligent. He outlived all of the buddies around him, but he didn't know he was going to. Most men are that way. You look through the Bible, and God gives them a long life if they'll be diligent, and they don't think they're going to have a long life. Jacob thinks he's going to die, and he doesn't die. Over and over you find one man after the next says, David says there with Jonathan, there's but a step between me and death. Well, you want to bet? You're going to live another 40 years. Man doesn't really know. However, we ought to be busy with what we have now. If you waste what you got now, why would he give you more? Petition, that's the next thing we'll see in Daniel 6, verse 10. The boys came in there and they call it a petition. That's a pagan phrase, petition. Pagan's going to call it a petition because they think he's asking for something. You petition, a beg, an ask. A saint would call it something else. A Christian calls it a prayer. A prayer. Daniel 6, verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went in into his house, his windows being open in the chamber toward Jerusalem. He knelt upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Now, God's telling us what he did, and he didn't say in there that he gave any petitions. He said he prayed. He prayed and thanked me, not petitioned me. The pagan said it was a petition. Now I'm going to show you that it can be both. However, the emphasis is on the prayer. Look at verse 6, verse 13. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, I can hear the sarcasm. That Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. God didn't call it a petition. God called it a prayer. They called it a petition. Yeah, he's asking a petition. They weren't listening very well, were they? There's something they would not be afraid of is a petition. That's exactly what they did. They went to the king with a petition. It was the very phrase they used. So now why are they scared about a petition? The only thing that makes a petition particularly scary is who you're petitioning. Now, they knew that he was talking to the Almighty, who meant something. That's what a Christian does when he prays, is he asks the supernatural being that created this whole thing we know as reality, and we're asking him to come down here and bend the rules of what we call reality. And many times he does. And we believe he will. Look at 1 Samuel 1. 1 Samuel 1. 1 Samuel 1, verse 17. I'm going to show you the Bible's use of this word petition. 1 Samuel 1:17. Hannah's come in here and she's all tore up because she needs something. She needs a child. The sister wife, has got all kinds of children running around everywhere, and she doesn't have any. And she's getting overlooked. She tore up about it. 1 Samuel 1:17. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. Now we understand from the story, when she went in, she was serious. It wasn't a flippant, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I hope, this is a good thing to ask for. No, she was serious about it, and she was tore up. She was begging God. A petition. That's how it's called. Look at verse 27. For this child instead of the word petition, it says prayed. Okay, so we understand from the story here, instead of just prayer, it's not saying a prayer. They have book of prayers. You can read a book of prayers. Okay, that's really not very heartfelt. That's memorized. That's brain known. Here, she says, I prayed for this child. We saw Eli come in there and say, hey, woman, you been drunk? Are you drinking? Get off the bottle. No, it was tearing her up inside. And the Lord hath given me my petition, which I ask of him. So a prayer in the Bible can be called a petition, but it has behind it an ethos, a heartfelt, desperate need. And that's what they said. We're scared of Daniel because he's going to feel like he has a desperate need to get rid of us pagans. And he's going to contact the one who has power. And that scared him to death. Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6, verse 18. Now you know the difference between prayer and petition. And a fuller meaning of it, we'll see this verse and maybe it'll explain it. Ephesians 6, verse 18. Praying always with all prayer, is he stuttering? And supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. Okay, there he said you're going to pray, but with all prayer. There's the praying with a petition, a serious matter that you're desperate for, like Hannah did. She petitioned and called it a prayer. Philippians 4. Philippians 4, verse 6. Daniel was known for this. They said, there's no way we can get a hold of this guy and get him to, knock him down a peg or two, unless we could get it concerning that one thing that he really always does. That praying business. We can't stand that. Philippians 4, verse 6. He says, be careful for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, And you can't miss the next part, or else you've not done the first part. With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. That is, pray to God, but then believe that God just heard and acted on what you asked for. He says, with thanksgiving. So pray and ask for it, then turn around and thank Him for taking care of it, doing it to the proper degree that He sees fit. And we know that'll be the best one. The next thing we'll see I call protection in verse 16. The king comes in and he's trying to encourage Daniel, the man he just threw into the lion's den. I think I just said, eat your own words. We'll trade spots. He says, thy God, whom thou servest continually, He will deliver thee. Now that's hopeful thinking on his part. He turns out to be true, but he didn't really believe this, because the next day he comes down and he says, Daniel, is thy God whom thou serve able to deliver thee? He asked, are you still alive? I thought you just told him that God was going to deliver him, but he didn't know. He's preaching a message he's been told to preach, or that he feels like ought to be the right thing to say. You know, they have these, they've got a book for preachers. I need to get one. It tells you all the right things to say at the right time. You know, at a funeral, at a wedding, at all these different places. It really means nothing. It's words on a page somebody else wrote. The king here thought, you know, this is probably the proper time to say, your God is a good one, and I know He's going to take care of you. And I'll come back to check on you in the morning. The lions will need to be fed again. Psalm chapter 46. Psalm 46, verse 1. Daniel was protected to a degree that neither the princes and the governors that were after him could understand, nor really the king, even though the king wanted to understand it. Psalm 46, verse 1. He says, God, our refuge and strength, is a very present help in trouble. That's a great verse to memorize. He says, whenever you're in trouble, you can count on it. Where is He? A very present help. You want to feel the presence of God, go through some trouble. Now, nobody chooses to go through trouble unless you're just a total idiot. However, you're going to go through some trouble. Don't forget this, and don't let the devil make you forget it, that in that trouble, God's more present than He was before you had the trouble. He says not only is God present, He says a very present. Look at Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29, verse 25. Proverbs 29, verse 25. He says, the fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. That is, I picture each of these words as an actual picture. And he's saying here, the fear of man brings a snare. Somebody's walked in with a package. In it is the fear of man. Now, you have something else. You have something you either exchange for that package, or you go take something and exchange it for something else. Here he says, but whoso putteth his trust, you have trust. You can exchange trust for the fear of man, or you can make trust become a tool. He says, whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. Now, I can't really imagine what Daniel had to experience going in the lion's den. I can see how that works out, and that's true and all of that, and I hope I'm never tested that way. However, we can see that's exactly what happened with Daniel. His trust was in God, and literally he was safe, just like the king said and didn't believe. Psalm chapter 91. The whole chapter's good. I'll just give you 10 verses. Psalm 91. Psalm 91, verse 1. He says, he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In him will I trust. Surely he... Notice the conjugation of this verb. Shall. That means it hadn't happened yet. He's prophesying. When you go through trouble, prophesy it. We're talking about trouble too much these days. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. Verse 4. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wing shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. That is, God's saying right here, I will give you something the world will promise and can't provide. For a Christian, for Daniel, he got something no one could provide. They sealed him in. And God says, that's no seal for me. I'll come down there and I'll use that seal against them. Verse 5, thou shalt not be afraid of terror by night, nor the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eye thou shalt behold and see the reward of the wicked. That's a scary thought. God says, I'm going after the wicked. I'll protect you. The picture he just painted is this. I'm going to hide you, protect you, and keep you safe. But I'm going to give you a front row seat of the destruction I wreak on the wicked. So we've seen it. The second you call it out as that, you will be maligned. I recall what was the gay nightclub that got bombed or something, the Orlando shooting thing. When I called that out for what it was, Christians had a hard time with me. That's what he says right here. Your eye will behold the reward of the wicked. Verse 9, because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High thy habitation, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. That's the God we serve. He's a protector. For Daniel in the lion's den, no other means could protect him. I don't think he went down there with a pocket knife. And had he had one, it would have done no good against a lion, let alone a pack of lions. I've been watching these lion documentaries, the prides in Africa and the different places they have them. And they have their own little personalities, and it's majestic, you know, they're great animals. However, I noticed this about them. The king will come to the forefront, and he literally is a legitimate king. And everybody submits to him, and he should be the king of the pride, and he protects them and watches out for them, but he only goes so long. And then when he's dethroned, you know how he's dethroned? Another lion or pack of lions comes up and kills him. They don't die on their own. They don't wander off and die somewhere. Someone dethrones them. For Daniel, he's down there with this pack of lions, and they're after him. Well, the devil's after us too, like a lion. But God will protect us just like he did Daniel, and tell that lion, the devil, to shut up and hold his mouth. Daniel, the last thing we'll see in our book of Daniel 6 is this in verse 28, the last verse of the chapter. So this Daniel prospered. Daniel is one of those characters that's an odd one in the Bible. Most characters in the Bible you get a full story on. And the story is this. He tried and he failed, and, you know, God put him through the ringer, and he got up and he did better. And then he failed again and he did better. You know, because it's our story. Not so with Daniel. You have to hunt hard and fast to find an error that Daniel committed. There is one in there, and we've talked about it before. I'm not going to point it out, but by and large, he had it all together, like nobody else has. The word Daniel, that name, Daniel. It's been repeated and used over and over in the Bible. You probably don't realize it, but David has a son named Daniel. That's Abigail's son, Daniel. Over and over you find this name popping up. So Daniel, that name itself has a history. He wasn't named that on accident. The other thing that's interesting about it is the name Daniel shows up only in 7 books of the Bible. It's used by Mark, it's used by Matthew, and it's used by Jesus Christ. And then a bunch of Old Testament books. 7 times. 7 books it's used in for perfection. We're supposed to take the Old Testament examples and use them as our guide, as our pattern to live a perfect life. Now, you're not going to do it. You're going to fail, I know, because I am too. However, the pattern is there. Somebody has done it. Undeterred by demons, dictators, and a den of lions, Daniel demonstrated it's not the flash or the fame or fortune that makes a man. It's his determination and dedication to diligently do what the Almighty commands him. Now, that's easier said than done. That's what's missing in Christianity. I'm not going to say America because it's worldwide. In Christianity is this: I don't have to. You know, we've gotten so lazy in Christianity. I don't remember it. I remember reading about it. R.A. Torrey was asked about his sermon prep. Now, he's got a long litany on what he does for a sermon prep. However, in one of his things, he says, I do regret to inform you, I do use a concordance for sermon prep. Meaning he didn't have all the verses he needed memorized. Wow. And he was ashamed about that. Whew. We're so lazy we won't even go to the concordance. That's Christianity. Daniel was a picture of dedication and determination. Perfection for us is not measured in political achievement, as it was for Daniel, nor in feats of grandeur, but in a demonstration of what Daniel did have, and we have, if we use it, an excellent spirit.